I want to start at the end, not at the beginning. Not at the part where my parents sat me down and told me what they had done. At the end, at the specific Tuesday morning when a bank officer in a gray suit opened a folder, read 4 lines of a document I had placed on his desk, and picked up his phone to call his legal department. He did not finish the call. He set the phone down. He looked at my parents. He looked at the folder. He looked at my parents again. Then he said, "I need to stop this transaction immediately." My mother's face did something I had never seen it do in 31 years. It collapsed. Not dramatically, not with tears. It just collapsed, like a structure that had been held up by a single assumption, and the assumption had just been removed. That document on his desk was 4 pages long. My grandmother had paid $400 to have it filed in 2017. It had been sitting in a county records office for 7 years doing absolutely nothing until that Tuesday morning when it did everything. Let me take you back to where this started. The letter arrived on a Thursday. I was at work when my neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, called me. She is 71 years old, has lived next door to my house for 14 years, and has a habit of collecting my mail when I am away on business trips because I asked her to once in 2019, and she has never stopped. I love her for it. On this particular Thursday, I was in Chicago for a 3-day logistics conference, and Mrs. Calloway called me at 2 p.m. to tell me there was an official-looking envelope from a bank on my doorstep. I asked her to open it. She read it to me over the phone. It was a mortgage statement, not a bill, not a routine correspondence. A mortgage statement for a loan of $210,000 secured against my property at 14 Brennan Street. The loan had been originated 11 days earlier. The first payment was due in 30 days. I stood in the middle of a hotel corridor in Chicago and I said, "Mrs. Calloway, can you read me the name on the borrower line?" She read it. It was my mother's name. "My name is Sarah. I am 34 years old. I purchased the house at 14 Brennan Street 4 years ago with a down payment my grandmother had gifted me before she passed. The mortgage I took out at purchase had been fully paid off 18 months earlier using an inheritance from my grandmother's estate. The house was mine, free and clear, no liens, no encumbrances, fully owned. My mother had walked into a bank 11 days ago and borrowed $10,000 against it. I thanked Mrs. Calloway. I hung up. I stood in that hotel corridor for approximately 45 seconds. Then I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "Mom, I just received a mortgage statement for 14 Brennan Street. I need you to tell me exactly what you have done." There was a pause. Then she said, "Sarah, your father and I have been in a very difficult financial situation, and we needed to act quickly. We used the power of attorney you gave us 2 years ago when you had your surgery. We knew you would understand once we explained." I said, "You borrowed $210,000 against my house. We needed to consolidate some debts," she said, "and cover some expenses. We are going to make the payments ourselves. You will not be affected at all." I said, "Mom, that is my house. I own it. You borrowed against my house without asking me." She said, "Sarah, we are your parents. We would never do anything to hurt you. This is a temporary situation and it will be resolved, and we need you to trust us right now." I said nothing for a long time. Then I said, "I will call you when I am back from Chicago." I hung up. I sat down on a chair in that hotel corridor, and I began to think very carefully about a conversation I had with my grandmother's attorney 7 years ago. On the day he explained to me exactly what was in the deed to 14 Brennan Street, he had said, "Sarah, your grandmother asked me to include something in this deed. I want to make sure you read it carefully, because if anyone ever tries to use this property without your direct personal consent, this clause will stop them. I want to tell you about my parents so you understand what I was dealing with. My father is a charming man. He has always been charming. He tells stories at dinner parties that make everyone laugh. He remembers birthdays. He sends handwritten notes. He is the kind of man who makes you feel, in any given conversation, like you are the most important person in the room. He is also a man who has been making financial decisions based on optimism rather than mathematics for his entire adult life. He has started 4 businesses. 3 of them failed within 2 years. The 4th is still technically operating, but has not turned a profit in 6 years. He has borrowed money from friends, from family members, from my mother's sister, from my mother's sister's husband, and from at least 2 people I know of who are no longer on speaking terms with our family as a direct result. My mother enables him. That is the only word for it. She has spent 35 years finding explanations for decisions that do not have good explanations. She is brilliant at it. She can take a financial catastrophe and present it as a temporary setback with a coherent resolution. Plan in the time it takes most people to read the first paragraph of a problem. She is not dishonest exactly. She genuinely believes the explanations she constructs. That is what makes her so effective and so dangerous. Together, they had looked at my house, the house my grandmother helped me buy, the house I had paid off early, the house that was the one completely stable asset in my life, and they had decided it was a resource, available, accessible, theirs to use because I was their daughter, and daughters, in their model of family, share everything with their parents when their parents need something they had not asked. They had not warned me. They had not given me the opportunity to say no, which tells you everything about whether they believed I would have said yes. My father called me that evening. He said, "Sweetheart, I know this feels sudden, but this is genuinely going to be fine. We have a plan. The loan covers our consolidated debt and gives us working capital for the business, and within 18 months we will refinance and you will never even know this happened." I said, "Dad, how did you get the bank to approve a loan against a property you do not own?" He said, "The power of attorney gave us authority to act on your behalf on property matters. The bank accepted it." I said, "I see." He said, "Are you angry?" I said, "I will call you tomorrow, Dad." I hung up and I called a man named Gerald. Gerald was my grandmother's attorney. He had handled her estate. He had been in the room the day the deed to 14 Brennan Street was first filed, and he had said something to me that day that I had filed away in the back of my memory for 7 years without ever expecting to need it. He had said, "Sarah, your grandmother asked me to include something in this deed. If anyone ever tries to use this property without your direct personal consent, this clause will stop them." Gerald said, "Tell me everything." I flew home from Chicago on Friday morning. I did not call my parents from the airport. I did not respond to my father's 3 text messages or my mother's 2 voicemails. I took a cab from the airport directly to Gerald's office. He was waiting for me. He had pulled the deed file before I arrived. It was open on his desk when I walked in. The specific yellowed folder that meant the document inside had been filed long enough to have history. Gerald is 73. He has handled estate law in this county for 41 years. He sat across from me and he explained the following in the measured, unhurried way of a man who has delivered good news and bad news in equal measure and has learned that the speed of delivery matters less than the clarity. He said, "Your grandmother included what is called an anti-encumbrance clause in this deed. It states specifically that the property at 14 Brennan Street cannot be mortgaged, refinanced, liened, or otherwise encumbered without your direct, personally witnessed, notarized signature, not a power of attorney signature, your signature. In person, witnessed, notarized. Any encumbrance placed on this property without meeting those exact requirements is void from the moment it is created." I said, "The bank accepted a power of attorney." Gerald said, "The bank did not check the deed for restrictive clauses before approving the loan. That happens more often than it should. It does not change the legal status of the clause. The mortgage your parents took out is void. It has been void since the moment it was originated. The bank simply does not know that yet." I said, "What happens when they find out?" Gerald looked at me over his glasses. He said, "The bank will have originated a loan secured against an asset. They cannot actually hold as collateral. They will need to unwind the transaction entirely. Your parents will be required to return the $210,000, and your parents will potentially face legal exposure for misrepresenting their authority to encumber the property." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "When can we go to the bank?" Gerald said, "Monday morning. I want to tell you what my parents did with the $210,000. In the 11 days between originating the loan and me finding out about it, they paid off $87,000 in consolidated personal debt, credit cards, a personal loan from my mother's sister that had been outstanding for 3 years, and 2 overdue supplier invoices from my father's business. They transferred $65,000 to my father's business account as working capital. My father told me later this was to cover payroll for 2 months and an equipment lease renewal he had been deferring. They spent $18,000 on what my mother described as necessary household updates. New kitchen appliances, a bathroom renovation they had been planning for 2 years, new furniture for the living room. The remaining $40,000 was sitting in their joint checking account when Monday morning arrived. I am not telling you this to make you angry on my behalf, though I understand if you are. I am telling you because the specific way they spent that money tells you everything about how they understood the situation. They did not treat it as a loan they were temporarily holding. They treated it as money that was theirs. They renovated their bathroom. They bought a new sofa. They paid debts they had been carrying for years, as if a long-standing burden had finally been lifted. They genuinely believed they had solved a problem. They had looked at my house, at the stable thing I had built, and they had decided that my stability was a resource they were entitled to draw on when their own instability became inconvenient. My grandmother had understood this was possible. That is why she paid $400 in 2017 to have 4 specific lines added to a deed. Monday morning, Gerald's office, 9 a.m. Gerald had prepared a 1-page summary of the anti-encumbrance clause with the relevant deed language highlighted and a citation to the county filing record. He had also prepared a formal letter addressed to the bank's legal department outlining the void, status of the mortgage, and requesting immediate suspension of the loan, account pending review. We drove to the bank together. Gerald carried the folder. I carried nothing. The branch manager was a man in his early 50s named Mr. Hartley. He had a neat desk and the careful manner of someone who has learned to remain neutral in situations that are not neutral. His assistant had told him we were coming. He was expecting a routine meeting. Gerald placed the deed summary on Mr. Hartley's desk. He placed the anti-encumbrance clause documentation beside it. He placed the county filing record on top. Then he sat back and folded his hands and said, "I would like you to read the highlighted section." Mr. Hartley read it. He read it again. He looked at the county filing date. He looked at the loan origination date. He looked at the power of attorney document his bank had accepted. He looked back at the deed. Then he picked up his phone to call his legal department. He did not finish the call. He set the phone down. He looked at the folder. He looked at us. He said, "I need to stop this transaction immediately." My parents were in the waiting area. My father had his charming face on, the one he uses when he expects a meeting to be manageable. My mother had her explanation ready. I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the particular posture of a woman who has prepared a coherent narrative and is waiting for her moment to deliver it. Mr. Hartley's assistant asked them to come in. My father walked in smiling. He stopped smiling when he saw Gerald. He stopped smiling completely when he saw the folder on the desk and Mr. Hartley's expression. My mother looked at me. I looked back at her. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Mr. Hartley said, "I have to inform you that there is a significant legal issue with the loan that was originated against 14 Brennan Street 11 days ago. What followed in that room took 40 minutes. Mr. Hartley explained the anti-encumbrance clause. He explained the void status of the mortgage. He explained that the bank had originated a loan against collateral it could not legally hold, and that the loan would need to be unwound in its entirety. My father attempted 3 things in sequence. First, he attempted charm, which failed because Mr. Hartley was not susceptible to charm in a professional context. Then he attempted a technical argument about the scope of the power of attorney, which failed because Gerald had anticipated it and had a 2-paragraph response prepared that Mr. Hartley read and nodded at. Then he attempted an appeal to family, turning to me directly and saying, "Sarah, we can resolve this privately. There is no need to involve the bank's legal team in a family matter." I said, "Dad, it stopped being a family matter when you walked into a bank and borrowed $10,000 against my house." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at his hands. My mother said, "Sarah, we are your parents." I said, "I know, Mom, I know you are." Gerald cleared his throat gently and redirected the conversation to the practical resolution. The bank required full return of the $10,000 within 30 days or would initiate recovery proceedings. The $40,000 remaining in my parents' account would be frozen immediately as partial security. The remaining $170,000 would need to be sourced and returned. My father asked what happened if they could not return the full amount within 30 days. Mr. Hartley said, "Then we will need to involve our legal department and potentially law enforcement given the circumstances of the origination." The room was very quiet after that. The $10,000 was returned in full within 22 days, not 30. 22. I do not know exactly how my parents assembled it. I know that my mother called her sister and asked for the $87,000 back that they had just repaid her, which was a conversation I would not have wanted to witness. I know my father liquidated the equipment his business had been leasing. I know the kitchen appliances were returned. I know the bathroom renovation materials were partially recoverable. I know my father's business did not survive the loss of the $65,000 working capital. It closed 4 months later. My father said at the time that it was a market conditions issue. I did not argue with him about that. The bank declined to pursue legal action once the full amount was returned. Gerald had advised me that this was the likely outcome and had recommended I not push for prosecution. I took his advice, not out of forgiveness exactly, out of the understanding that the outcome I needed had already been achieved and that additional legal proceedings would cost me time and energy. I did not want to spend. My parents did not speak to me for 5 months. When my father finally called, it was my birthday, and he said, "I hope you have a good day." "Sarah," I said, "thank you." "Dad, we did not discuss any of it." My mother called a week later. She said, "I want you to to know that we never meant to hurt you. I said, I know, Mom. She said, we just needed help. I said, I know that too. There was a pause. Then she said, your grandmother was very thorough. I said, she always was. I go to visit the house at 14 Brennan Street every Sunday. I have a routine. Coffee on the back porch, the same chair, the same mug, the same view of Mrs. Calloway's garden next door where she is usually doing something methodical and unhurried with her roses. On a Sunday, 3 weeks after the bank meeting, I was sitting in that chair when Mrs. Calloway came to the fence. She said, everything sorted out with that letter? I said, all sorted, Mrs. Calloway. She nodded. She went back to her roses. That house cost my grandmother $400 to protect in 2017. $400 for a lawyer to add 4 lines to a deed. 4 lines that sat in a county filing office for 7 years waiting for the moment they were needed. She never told me she was worried. She never said she thought my parents might do something like this. She just paid $400 and filed 4 lines, and trusted that if the moment ever came, the document would be there. It was there. It is still there. And every Sunday morning, on that back porch with my coffee, I think about what it means to love someone carefully, enough to protect them from things you hope will never happen. That is what she did. That is what the deed was. That is what $400 bought.